Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing on the banks of a wide, slow river sometime in the 6th century before the Common Era. The air carries the soft warmth of Mesopotamian morning. A faint breeze moves across the surface of the Euphrates, carrying with it the scent of wet clay river reeds and distant cooking fires beginning to awaken across the city. Before you rises Babylon. At first, the city appears almost dreamlike in the pale light of dawn. Massive walls stretch across the horizon like a man-made mountain range. Towers rise at steady intervals, their shadows still long and cool against the earth. The low murmur of the waking city reaches your ears, the shuffle of sandals along packed earth streets, the creak of wooden carts, the distant call of merchants preparing their goods. You're about to step into one of the most powerful cities the ancient world would ever know. For a moment, you simply watch the river. Flat-bottomed boats drift slowly along the Euphrates, guided by poles and quiet patience. Some carry sacks of grain. Others transport timber floated down from the distant mountains. The water glimmers gold as the rising sun spreads across the valley. Behind you lies the wide land of Mesopotamia, the fertile plain between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Human communities have lived here for thousands of years. Farmers learned long ago that the rivers could be guided through canals to feed their fields. Slowly villages became towns, towns became cities, and from those cities emerged kings who believed they ruled with the blessing of the gods. Babylon stands among the greatest of them. Your feet move slowly toward the city gates as the morning brightens. The packed earth road beneath your sandals feels warm already, even though the day has barely begun. Dust rises softly with each step. Somewhere ahead, a donkey brays impatiently. A potter's wheel begins turning. The city is waking fully now. Records preserved on clay tablets confirm that by the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, the second around the early 6th century BCE, Babylon had grown into one of the largest urban centres on Earth. Modern archaeological studies conducted by researchers working with institutions such as Yale and Oxford have examined the ruins and estimated that the city may have covered more than 800 hectares. Tens of thousands of people lived within and around its walls, making it a metropolis by ancient standards. As you approach the outer defences, the scale becomes easier to understand. The walls are enormous. They rise from the earth in thick bands of mud brick strengthened with baked outer layers. The morning light reveals their reddish surface almost glowing under the growing sun. Towering gates interrupt the walls at intervals, each protected by massive wooden doors reinforced with bronze. For a moment you pause near a small group of travellers also waiting to enter. They speak quietly in several languages. One voice carries the accents of distant Anatolia. Another sounds Egyptian. Babylon, even at sunrise, already feels like a meeting place for the wider world. A curious footnote recorded in later Greek accounts claims that the city's outer defensive system was so wide that chariots could ride along the top of the walls side by side. Some historians believe these descriptions were exaggerated by astonished visitors who had never seen construction on such a scale. Yet excavations confirm that the walls were indeed exceptionally thick and complex, built in multiple layers of fortification. You notice something else as the gates begin to open. The city breathes with order. Guards stand beside the entrance in disciplined rows. Their bronze helmets catch the light. Spears rest upright beside them. A scribe sits on a low stool near the gate, holding a stylus over a small clay tablet. Travellers pause briefly to speak with him before entering. Administration even at the city gate is already at work. Scholars still disagree over exactly how many defensive walls surrounded Babylon at its height. Some interpretations of ancient texts suggest two great concentric barriers, while others argue that canals and natural features served as additional protective layers. The debate continues among archaeologists who study both written records and satellite mapping of the ancient landscape. Your turn to enter comes soon. The gate looms above you now, its wooden doors slowly swinging inward with a heavy groan. Up close, the scale feels even more impressive. The doorway could easily admit several carts at once. The smell of sun-baked brick mixes with the scent of animals and freshly cut reeds. Inside, the city reveals its first true breath of life. A narrow street stretches forward between tall mud brick houses. Their upper floors lean slightly toward one another, shading the passage below. Wooden balconies hang above the street, draped with woven mats that filter the rising sun. Children run past carrying baskets. Somewhere nearby, a woman grinds grain on a stone quern. The rhythmic scraping sound echoes gently against the walls. Your hand brushes against the surface of a nearby building as you walk. The brick feels warm and slightly rough, still holding the coolness of the night beneath its outer layer. Life here begins early. Babylon's strength lies not only in its kings or its armies, but in the thousands of ordinary people who wake each morning to continue the quiet work of the city. Bakers prepare bread ovens. Metalworkers light their charcoal fires. Farmers arrive through the gates with vegetables and barley from the surrounding fields. And above it all, beyond the rooftops, one structure slowly becomes visible in the growing light. A vast step tower rises in the distance. Even from here, you can see its layered silhouette climbing toward the sky. The ziggurat of Babylon dominates the horizon, a reminder that this city does not belong only to its people, but also to its gods. The morning sun climbs higher. Babylon is fully awake now. The streets begin to fill, voices grow louder. Carts roll across the packed earth roads, their wooden wheels creaking in steady rhythm, and you continue walking deeper into the greatest city of the ancient world, unaware that beyond these streets lie wonders that travelers will remember for thousands of years. The deeper you move into Babylon, the more clearly the scale of its defenses reveals itself. The narrow street you first entered slowly widens as it approaches another stretch of massive brick fortification within the city. The early sunlight now pours fully across the rooftops, warming the clay walls and filling the air with the smell of heated dust. Somewhere above, pigeons flutter from one rooftop to another, their wings echoing softly between the buildings. You begin to understand that Babylon is not protected by a single wall, but by a layered system of defences designed with extraordinary care. Before you rises another towering barrier of brick, thick enough that several men could stand shoulder to shoulder upon its summit. Watchtowers punctuate the structure at regular intervals, each one casting long shadows across the ground below. For a moment you pause in the shade of one of these towers. The stone beneath your hand feels cool compared with the growing heat of the morning. Guards patrol slowly above their silhouettes, moving against the bright sky. Babylon's engineers did not rely on walls alone. The city's defences were carefully integrated with canals, moats and controlled water methods that used the Euphrates itself as a protective feature. Ancient records describe channels diverted around the city so that attackers would face both towering walls and broad stretches of water. Clay tablets recovered by archaeologists provide important confirmation of this remarkable planning. Research analysed by historians working with institutions such as Stanford and Oxford indicates that Nebuchadnezzar II invested enormous resources into expanding and reinforcing Babylon's fortifications during his reign in the 6th century BCE. These works were not merely cosmetic, they were part of a strategic effort to transform Babylon into a city that could withstand even the most determined siege. The engineering ambition becomes easier to grasp as you follow a ramp that gently curves upward along the inner wall. From here the view changes. The city spreads out beneath you like a vast mosaic of rooftops, courtyards, temples and streets. Smoke rises lazily from cooking fires. The sound of daily life drifts upward in a steady murmur. Vendors calling out prices, animals shifting in their pens, the occasional clang of metal striking metal from a distant workshop. Beyond the rooftops you can see the Euphrates cutting through the city like a silver ribbon. Large wooden bridges span the river at several points, linking the eastern and western halves of Babylon. Boats move slowly beneath them, guided by poles and rope lines. A curious historical aside appears in the writings of the Greek historian Herodotus, who visited the region centuries later. He claimed that Babylon's defensive walls were so immense that they measured roughly 80 kilometers in circumference. Modern archaeologists suspect that this number included outer agricultural zones and satellite settlements, rather than the central urban core itself. Still, even revised estimates confirm that Babylon's fortification system was among the most ambitious urban defences ever attempted in the ancient world. As you continue walking along the wall, the wind carries faint sounds from outside the city. Farmers are already working in the surrounding fields. Their irrigation canals glimmer in the sunlight, guiding river water toward barley crops that stretch across the plains. Babylon's survival depends on this fertile landscape. Without the steady harvests of grain, dates and vegetables, even the strongest walls would mean little. You lean briefly against the parapet and watch a small caravan approaching along the distant road. Their donkeys carry bundles wrapped in woven reed mats. Merchants often arrive this way from neighbouring regions. Some come from the mountains of Anatolia with timber and metals. Others travel from the Persian plateau with wool or lapis lazuli. Babylon's wealth grows not only from conquest, but from its position at the crossroads of trade routes linking the Near East. Yet the city's rulers never forgot the dangers of that position. Powerful empires have risen and fallen across this land for centuries. The Assyrians once dominated Mesopotamia with a reputation for brutal military campaigns. Their armies marched across the region with terrifying efficiency. Babylon itself spent long periods under Assyrian control before eventually reclaiming independence. Scholars still argue about how much of Babylon's later defensive obsession was shaped by memories of those earlier conflicts. Some historians believe the city's immense walls were built partly as a psychological declaration, a visible symbol that Babylon would never again bow easily to foreign domination. The wind shifts slightly as you descend the ramp back toward the streets. The air now carries the richer smells of the city itself. Fresh bread baking in clay ovens, crushed herbs from cooking pots, and the faint metallic scent drifting from bronze workshops. Babylon is no longer simply a distant silhouette of walls and towers. You are now moving through the living body of the city. At the base of the wall, several soldiers rest beneath a shaded awning. Their shields lean against the bricks beside them. The metal edges catch the sunlight in sharp flashes. One of the men sharpens his spear tip with slow, careful strokes against a whetstone. Another glances toward you briefly before returning his attention to the street. Security remains constant here. One slightly peculiar detail appears in several surviving Babylonian administrative tablets. These records suggest that some sections of the wall may have been regularly inspected and repaired by organised groups of labourers drawn from different districts of the city. Rather than relying entirely on royal construction crews, the responsibility for maintaining parts of the defensive system might have been distributed among Babylon's population. If true, the walls belong not only to the king, but to the entire city. The thought lingers as you continue forward. Ahead, the street begins to widen once more. The buildings grow taller. Decorative brickwork appears along some of the facades, hinting that you are approaching a more ceremonial part of Babylon. In the distance, something bright catches the sunlight. A structure gleams with an unusual shade of deep blue. Even from afar, it stands apart from the earthy tones of the surrounding city. You are approaching one of the most famous gateways of the ancient world. The Ishtar Gate awaits. The street ahead grows wider and more carefully paved as you approach the brilliant structure gleaming in the distance. The deep blue surface you noticed moments ago now rises before you in full view, glowing in the bright Mesopotamian sun. You slow your steps almost without realizing it. The Ishtar Gate stands like a jewel set into the defensive walls of Babylon. Its color alone is astonishing. The bricks are coated in a rich blue glaze, a hue so intense that it seems almost alive under the light. Gold and white relief figures stride across the surface in orderly rows, powerful lions with flowing manes, long-necked dragons with curling tails and sturdy bulls with lowered heads. Each animal appears to move forward along the walls as though the entire gate itself were part of a slow eternal procession. You tilt your head upward. The gateway towers above you, its arch framed by tall crenellated towers that stretch toward the sky. Sunlight reflects off the glazed bricks in bright flashes that dance across the ground at your feet. The smell of warm clays fills the air, mingled with the faint scent of bitumen used to bind the bricks together. Babylon's builders clearly intended this place to impress. Historical records confirm that the Ishtar Gate was constructed during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar the second, in the early 6th century BCE, archaeological excavations led by German teams in the early 20th century uncovered large sections of the gate, many of which are now carefully reconstructed in museums. Researchers studying the materials and inscriptions have found evidence that the gate originally formed part of a massive double entrance system that marked the northern ceremonial approach into the heart of Babylon. One inscription from Nebuchadnezzar himself proudly declares that he ordered the gate to be decorated with brilliantly coloured glazed bricks so that travellers entering the city would marvel at Babylon's beauty and strength. Standing here now, it is easy to see why. A small crowd of travellers gathers near the entrance, waiting to pass beneath the arch. Merchants guide their pack animals carefully through the space between the towering walls. Guards observe the movement calmly but attentively, their spears resting upright against their shoulders. As you step closer, the carved animals on the walls become even more detailed. The lions appear especially vivid. Their bodies stretch forward mid-stride, muscles defined beneath their sculpted surfaces, their mouths open, slightly revealing rows of teeth. You can almost imagine the sound of their roar echoing down the stone streets. These lions are not merely decorative, they are sacred symbols of the goddess Ishtar, one of the most powerful deities worshipped in Babylon. Ishtar embodies war-love, fertility, and celestial power. Her presence here at the city's gate reminds every visitor that Babylon stands under divine protection. A curious observation made by archaeologists studying the surviving bricks reveals that the craftsmen achieved the deep blue colour using a specialised glaze containing copper minerals. The firing process required careful control of temperature inside large kilns. Considering the thousands of bricks needed to decorate the gate, the project must have involved an enormous network of artisans, kiln operators, and labourers working together over many years. You run your fingertips lightly along one of the bricks as you pass. The surface feels smooth and slightly cool despite the sunlight. The lion's raised outlines create gentle ridges that catch the light differently than the surrounding glaze. Even after more than 2,000 years, the craftsmanship remains astonishing. Yet one curious detail often surprises modern visitors. Although the blue Ishtar Gate appears overwhelmingly magnificent today, it was only one part of a much larger decorative system that once stretched deep into the city. The processional way, which begins just beyond this gate, was lined with hundreds of additional lion reliefs. Travellers entering Babylon would have found themselves surrounded by an entire avenue of symbolic guardians guiding them toward the sacred centre of the city. The full effect must have been overwhelming. Still, historians continue debating aspects of the gate's original appearance. Some scholars argue that the colours were even more vivid than what modern reconstructions suggest, perhaps including additional painted elements that have long since faded away. Others wonder whether parts of the gateway were periodically repainted or repaired as the decades passed. The surviving fragments leave room for interpretation, and the discussion remains lively among archaeologists studying Babylon's architecture. A soft rumble of cartwheels draws your attention. A caravan enters the gate behind you, their donkeys stepping cautiously across the paved stones. The sound echoes upward through the archway in a low rhythmic pattern. The city beyond the gate opens into a wide ceremonial avenue. You step forward beneath the towering arch of the Ishtar Gate itself. For a brief moment, the sunlight disappears as the structure's massive shadow falls across you. The temperature cools slightly beneath the shade. The smell of stone and glaze replaces the warmer scent of dust outside. Your footsteps echo against the smooth paving stones. Then you emerge on the other side. Ahead lies a broad avenue stretching straight through the city like a royal path. The road surface is carefully paved with large stone slabs. On both sides, walls rise again, lined with yet more sculpted lions marching in endless rows. The processional way. Here festivals once unfolded with extraordinary ceremony. Priests carried sacred statues of the gods along this route during the great New Year celebration known as the Akitu Festival. Crowds gathered along the walls to watch as music, incense, and chanting filled the air. You begin walking slowly along the avenue. The lions beside you appear to move with every step, their forms repeating again and again down the long ceremonial corridor. Babylon is revealing its grandeur piece by piece. And deeper within the city, even greater wonders still wait. The great avenue stretches forward beneath the open sky, wide enough for several chariots to pass side by side. The stones beneath your sandals feel smoother here than anywhere else in the city. Each slab has been carefully fitted into place, forming a surface that gleams faintly under the strengthening sunlight. You continue walking along what the people of Babylon call the processional way. The walls on either side rise several meters high, their surfaces decorated with rows upon rows of sculpted lions. Their bodies stride forward in identical rhythm, muscles stretched, mouths slightly open as if caught in a silent roar. Their raised shapes cast soft shadows that shift as the sun climbs higher. For a moment, the repetition becomes almost hypnotic. Lion after lion, step after step. Your ears begin to fill with the growing noise of the city around you. Vendors have already begun setting up along side streets that branch away from the ceremonial road. Wooden stalls creak as their frames are assembled. A woman shakes out a woven cloth to display pottery bowls painted with red geometric patterns. Somewhere nearby, a goat bleats impatiently, yet the processional way itself remains surprisingly open. This road is not meant for ordinary daily traffic. It is reserved for something grander. Historical inscriptions carved during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II explain that the avenue served as the ceremonial route used during Babylon's most important religious celebration, the Akitu festival. This New Year ritual marked the renewal of divine order in the cosmos and reaffirmed the king's legitimacy to rule. Researchers studying cuneiform tablets, including work examined by historians affiliated with institutions such as Oxford and Yale, have reconstructed parts of the festival's elaborate sequence. During the celebration, statues of Babylon's major gods were carried from their temples along this very road. Priests, musicians, and attendants formed long processions while crowds gathered along the decorated walls to witness the sacred journey. As you walk forward, you try to imagine that ancient spectacle. The quiet morning suddenly fills with imagined sound. Drums echo between the walls. Bronze cymbals clash in rhythmic bursts. Flutes weave high melodies above the deeper chants of priests reciting sacred hymns. Incense smoke curls into the sky, carrying the rich scent of cedar and resin. And at the centre of it all, the statue of the god Marduk would pass slowly along this avenue. A slightly unusual detail preserved in some ritual texts suggests that during the part of the Akitu festival, the king himself was temporarily stripped of his royal insignia before entering the temple. A high priest would then slap the king across the face, forcing him to kneel and reaffirm that his power ultimately came from the gods rather than from his own strength. It is a surprisingly dramatic moment in an otherwise solemn ceremony. Scholars still debate the exact meaning of this ritual humiliation. Some believe it symbolized the king's humility before divine authority. Others argue that it functioned as a public reminder that even the most powerful ruler remained subject to cosmic order. The surviving texts leave room for interpretation, and historians continue discussing the ritual's deeper symbolism. Your attention returns to the lions surrounding you. Each one is slightly different upon closer inspection. Though their overall shapes repeat in a precise pattern, subtle variations appear in their carved details. One lion's mane curls slightly differently from the next. Another's claws press more deeply into the brick beneath its paws. These differences reveal the human hands behind the work. Teams of craftsmen likely shaped the molds used to create the relief bricks. Kilns fired them in large batches before they were assembled into the towering decorative walls that now frame the processional way. The blue background glaze that dominated the Ishtar Gate gradually shifts here to warmer tones of yellow and cream. The lions themselves glow with a pale golden colour that catches the sunlight beautifully. Their forms appear almost alive against the bright surface. The road continues straight ahead for several hundred meters. As you walk, the buildings beyond the decorative walls begin to grow taller. Large administrative complexes and temple structures occupy this central district of Babylon. Their gates face the processional way like watchful guardians of the city's sacred core. You begin to notice more officials moving through the area. Several scribes sit beneath shaded awnings, pressing styluses into damp clay tablets. Their hands move quickly, recording transactions or copying administrative records. A group of young apprentices kneel nearby, practicing the wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform writing under the watchful eyes of their teachers. Babylon's power is not built only on bricks and walls, it is also built on writing. One curious fragment discovered among Babylonian administrative archives reveals that some sections of the processional way may have been regularly cleaned and maintained by designated temple workers. Even the ceremonial road itself required constant care to preserve its impressive appearance for festivals and visiting dignitaries. You pause briefly beside one of the lion walls and look back toward the distant arch of the Ishtar Gate. From here, the gate appears smaller than before, though its deep blue colour still glows brightly against the city's earth-tone buildings. The perspective makes the processional way feel like a grand corridor stretching between two monumental points. Ahead, the avenue continues toward the spiritual heart of Babylon. Somewhere beyond the next rise stands the great temple complex of the god Marduk, and above the rooftop, still visible against the brightening sky, the massive stepped silhouette of the ziggurat rises like a man-made mountain reaching toward the heavens. You continue walking toward it, guided by the silent lions. The great ceremonial avenue slowly fades behind you as the streets begin to branch outward into a web of smaller passages. The towering lion walls give way to clusters of mud brick houses, workshops and shaded courtyards. The rhythm of the processional way dissolves into something far more lively and unpredictable. You're entering the markets of Babylon. Almost immediately the air changes. Instead of the cool scent of gaze, brick and stone, you now breathe in the mingled aromas of spices, baked, bread, leather, and animals. Voices rise from every direction. The steady hum of commerce fills the streets like the low roar of a river. Merchants call out to passing customers. A basket seller lifts a woven tray towards you, demonstrating its strength with a quick shake. Nearby, a woman arranges dates and figs into careful piles beneath a cloth canopy. Their dark skins glisten slightly in the heat of the growing morning. Your sandals step over scattered straw and packed earth as you move deeper into the market quarter. Stalls line both sides of the street, their wooden frames draped with woven mats that cast soft shade across the goods below. Copper pots hang from hooks, catching the sunlight with sharp flashes. Small jars filled with coloured powders stand arranged in neat rows, their contents glowing red, yellow, and deep brown. A faint wind carries the fragrance of crushed coriander and cumin. Babylon's markets reflect the enormous reach of its empire. Clay tablets discovered in Babylonian archives confirm that the city functioned as a central trading hub, connecting regions across the ancient Near East. Administrative records studied by researchers associated with universities such as Stanford and Oxford show detailed lists of goods entering and leaving the city wool from the highland cedar, wood from the mountains of Lebanon, tin and copper used for bronze tools, and precious stones transported along long caravan routes. Standing here among the stalls, you begin to see those trade networks in motion. A merchant wearing a fringed robe carefully unwraps a bundle of dyed cloth. The fabric gleams with rich purple threads, a colour produced through complex dyeing techniques that require rare materials and considerable skill. Customers gather around him, murmuring quietly as they examine the cloth's texture. Further down the street, a metalworker hammers a strip of bronze into shape atop a small anvil. Each strike sends a sharp ringing sound into the air. Sparks flicker briefly before vanishing against the dusty ground. The markets are not silent places of quiet exchange. They are alive. Children dart between the stalls, carrying small baskets for their families. Donkeys shuffle slowly along narrow lanes, their packs filled with sacks of grain. A group of scribes sits beside a shaded table, writing out small clay contracts for merchants who wish to record their transactions. Babylon's economy depends heavily on written agreements. One fascinating tablet uncovered by archaeologists contains the detailed terms of a business partnership between two traders who agreed to share profits from transporting goods along the Euphrates. The tablet even records the penalties one partner would owe if the cargo were lost or delayed. Such contracts reveal how sophisticated Babylonian commercial life had become. Yet the market holds more than practical trade. A curious little scene unfolds beside a stall selling perfumes. A merchant lifts a small clay vial and gently uncorks it. A soft plume of fragrance drifts into the air. The scent is warm and slightly sweet, perhaps made from crushed myrrh or imported incense resins. A pair of customers lean closer, closing their eyes briefly as they test the aroma. Perfume in ancient Babylon was not merely a luxury. Certain fragrances carried religious significance, used in temple rituals or offered to the gods during ceremonies. Oddly enough, one small archaeological discovery suggests that some Babylonian perfume recipes included surprisingly earthy ingredients. A few surviving tablets appear to list mixtures that combined plant oils with animal fats and aromatic woods, producing scents that might seem unusually strong to modern noses. The crowd thickens as you move forward. Voices overlap in a dozen accents and dialects. Babylon attracts travellers from distant lands, and the markets reflect this diversity. A tall trader wearing a patterned cloak speaks in a language unfamiliar to you while negotiating over a stack of metal tools. Nearby, a group of farmers from the countryside unload baskets of onions and lentils freshly harvested from nearby fields. Babylon's food supply flows constantly through these streets. Without this daily movement of goods, the great city could not sustain its enormous population. Still, historians continue discussing how large Babylon's population truly was at its peak. Some scholars believe the urban centre houses more than 50,000 residents, while others argue the number could have been even higher when surrounding districts and temporary visitors are included. The debate remains open because the surviving archaeological evidence leaves room for interpretation. The sun climbs higher overhead. Shadows shrink along the market streets as the day grows warmer. A group of bakers begins pulling round loaves of bread from a clay oven set into the ground. The scent of fresh grain drifts across the stalls, instantly drawing a small line of customers. You pause briefly to watch. The baker uses a long wooden paddle to lift the bread from the oven's glowing interior. Steam rises from the golden crusts as they are stacked onto a flat basket lined with cloth. Life in Babylon is constant motion. Every exchange, every conversation, every sack of grain carried across the market helps sustain the vast machinery of the city. And somewhere beyond these busy streets, the sacred temples of Babylon await. Gradually, the crowded markets begin to thin. The noise of bargaining voices fades behind you, replaced by a calmer rhythm of footsteps and quiet conversation. The streets widen again and the buildings become larger, more carefully arranged. Decorative brick patterns appear along the walls and tall gateways mark the entrances to enclosed courtyards. You are approaching the sacred district of Babylon. Even before you see the temples themselves, the atmosphere changes. The air carries a faint scent of burning incense. Somewhere ahead, a low chant drifts across the open spaces between buildings. The sound is steady and measured, rising and falling in slow patterns that seem to guide the rhythm of the morning. You step through a wide gateway into a large courtyard. The ground beneath your sandals is paved with carefully laid bricks, warm from the sun. Around the edges of the courtyard stand tall structures with thick walls and narrow doorways. Their surfaces are decorated with relief carvings and coloured tiles that reflect the city's wealth and devotion. At the centre of this sacred district stands the temple complex dedicated to Babylon's chief god, Marduk. For a moment you pause to take in the scale of the place. The temple buildings spread outward like a small city within the city. Corridors lead into shadowed chambers. Smaller shrines cluster around the main sanctuary, each dedicated to different divine figures within the Babylonian pantheon. Priests move quietly through the art courtyards. Their robes fall in long white folds that brush lightly against the brick pavement. Some carry small bowls filled with incense. Others hold clay tablets or ritual tools used during ceremonies. Their movements are deliberate and calm, as though every step follows a sacred rhythm. Babylon's religious life revolves around this complex. Record preserved on cuneiform tablets reveal that the Temple of Marduk, often called Esagila, functioned not only as a place of worship but also as an important administrative centre. Scholars studying these tablets, including research examined by historians working with institutions such as Yale and Oxford, have found evidence that temple authorities managed landholdings, collected offerings, and even oversaw certain economic activities connected to the surrounding region. The temple is therefore both spiritual heart and administrative engine. You walk slowly along the edge of the courtyard, careful not to interrupt the priests who move between the buildings. The soft scrape of sandals against brick blends with the distant murmur of prayers. A small group of worshippers kneels near a low altar. Before them burns a shallow bronze bowl filled with glowing charcoal. Wisps of fragrant smoke curl upward, carrying the scent of cedar resin and crushed herbs. One of the worshippers raises his hands toward the smoke while quietly reciting a prayer. The ritual feels both intimate and ancient. Babylonian religion is deeply woven into everyday life. People come here not only for grand ceremonies, but also for small personal petitions, requests for health success in trade protection during travel, or guidance from the gods. A curious detail preserved in some temple records reveals that priests often interpreted unusual dreams for visitors seeking divine advice. Individuals would describe their dreams to trained interpreters who compared the visions with long lists of symbolic meanings recorded on clay tablets. A dream about flowing water, for example, might suggest prosperity, while a dream of broken tools could warn of trouble ahead. Such interpretations show how closely the Babylonians believed the divine world touched their daily existence. Your attention shifts as a small procession begins moving across the courtyard. Several priests carry a wooden platform draped in embroidered cloth. Upon it rests a small statue covered in polished metal. The object glimmers in the sunlight as the group passes quietly towards an inner chamber. It may represent one of the many deities honoured alongside Marduk. The Babylonian pantheon is vast. Gods and goddesses govern nearly every aspect of the natural and human world: the sun, the moonstorms, wisdom, love, agriculture, and countless other forces that shape life across the land. Scholars continue discussing exactly how these divine figures were understood within Babylonian theology. Some historians suggest that Marduk gradually rose above the other gods as the city gained political dominance. Others argue that the pantheon remained more balanced, with different gods retaining authority over their respective domains. The surviving texts leave room for interpretation, and the debate among specialists remains lively. You move toward the shadow of a tall temple wall. Its surface is cool to the touch, sheltered from the direct sun. Small niches carved into the brick hold oil lamps that would be lit during evening rituals. Above them, faded painted patterns hint at colours that once decorated the entire structure. Babylon's temples were not silent monuments. They were living institutions. Priests prepared daily offerings of bread, beer, fruit, and meat for the gods. Musicians played instruments during ceremonies. Scribes recorded temple inventories with careful precision. All of this activity unfolds quietly around you now. And rising beyond the temple rooftops, dominating the skyline of Babylon, stands the structure that symbolizes the city's connection between earth and heaven. The Great Ziggurat. Its massive stepped layers climb toward the sky like a stairway for the gods themselves. You begin walking toward it. The shadow of the temple complex slowly falls behind you as you approach the towering structure that dominates Babylon's skyline. From the streets below, the ziggurat already seemed enormous, but as you move closer, its true scale becomes almost overwhelming. The structure rises in massive stepped layers, each terrace stacked carefully upon the one beneath it. Wide stairways climb upward, along its face leading from one level to the next. This is Etemenanki. The name itself carries deep meaning in the ancient language of Babylon. It translates roughly as House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. The people who built this monument believed it formed a sacred link between the human world below and the divine realm above. You pause at the base of the first terrace. The bricks beneath your hand feel rough and sun-warmed. Their surfaces carry faint impressions left by the moulds used when they were shaped centuries earlier. Bitumen mortar binds the bricks together, giving off a subtle tar-like scent in the midday heat. The ziggurat does not resemble the pyramids of distant Egypt. Instead of smooth, sloping sides, its design rises in great rectangular tiers. Each level forms a broad platform that supports the next stage above it. The staircases are wide enough for groups of priests or attendants to climb together during ceremonial rituals. Historical texts from Babylonian archives confirm that the ziggurat stood at the center of the city's sacred district, directly associated with the Temple of Marduk you passed earlier. Archaeological studies examined by researchers working with institutions such as Oxford and Stanford suggest that the structure may have reached a height of nearly 90 meters, making it one of the tallest buildings in the ancient world. Standing here at its base, you begin to understand how extraordinary that would have seemed to ancient visitors. Your sandals press against the first steps as you begin climbing. The stone feels warm under the sun. The air grows slightly thinner as you ascend the long staircase. Below you, the city of Babylon gradually spreads outward in all directions. At the first terrace, you pause briefly to catch your breath. From here, the rooftops of the surrounding temples form a complex pattern of courtyards and corridors. Priests move between the buildings like small white figures drifting across the sunlit brick. Beyond the sacred district, the markets stretch into the distance. You can still hear faint echoes of trade drifting through the air, distant voices, the low rumble of cartwheels, the occasional bray of a donkey. The Euphrates glimmers far away, reflecting the bright sky in silver streaks. You continue upward. Each terrace reveals a new perspective. The wind grows stronger as you climb, carrying cooler air across the massive structure. The smell of incense from the temple courtyards fades, replaced by the dry scent of heated clay and distant river water. A curious tradition preserved in later Mesopotamian writings suggests that the top level of the ziggurat contained a small shrine reserved for the god Marduk. According to some ancient descriptions, this chamber held a sacred bed and table, where the god's divine presence was believed to descend during certain ceremonies. The idea might sound unusual to modern ears, yet for the Babylonians, the ziggurat was not merely an architectural wonder. It served as a cosmic meeting point where heaven and earth briefly touched. Scholars continue to debate whether the upper shrine functioned exactly as these later accounts describe. Some historians believe Greek writers misunderstood certain Babylonian rituals and interpreted them through unfamiliar cultural lenses. Others argue that the shrine did indeed host symbolic ceremonies representing the union between divine and earthly realms. The exact details remain uncertain, but the symbolism of the tower itself is unmistakable. You reach another terrace and turn to look back. The city of Babylon spreads out like a vast map beneath your feet. The processional way appears now as a pale line cutting through the urban landscape. The blue Ishtar Gate glimmers faintly in the distance. Fields beyond the walls stretch across the plains, their irrigation canals forming thin, shimmering threads in the sunlight. The scale of the city becomes clearer from this height. A slightly curious note recorded by ancient scribes mentions that workers constantly repaired sections of the ziggurat's outer layers because exposure to wind and rain slowly eroded the mud bricks. Maintaining such an enormous structure required regular labour, which may have involved teams of craftsmen assigned by temple authorities. The tower was therefore not a static monument. It was a living construction project that required ongoing care. You climb the final staircase slowly. The wind now moves steadily across the upper terraces, rustling the edges of nearby temple banners. The city's noise fades into a distant murmur far below. At the summit, a small sanctuary stands quietly beneath the open sky. Its walls are modest compared to the vast structure supporting it. Yet the position gives it immense symbolic power. From here, the priests believed their prayers rose directly toward the heavens. You stand at the edge of the terrace and gaze out across Babylon. The sunlight spreads across the city's rooftops, walls, temples and markets in warm golden tones. For a moment, the ancient world seems to pause, and from this towering height, Babylon truly feels like the center of the world. The wind brushes gently against your face as you begin descending from the high terraces of the ziggurat. With each step downward, the sounds of the city slowly return. At first, they are distant murmurs carried upward on the breeze. Then the noises sharpen into recognizable rhythms, the rumble of carts, the call of merchants, the distant ring of metal tools striking bronze. Babylon is alive again around you. At the base of the Great Tower, the sacred district stretches outward toward another group of immense buildings. Their walls appear thicker, their courtyards larger, their entrances guarded with greater attention. You are approaching the royal palaces. These structures belong to Nebuchadnezzar II, the powerful king whose reign transformed Babylon into the greatest city of its age. His building project reshaped the skyline, expanded the walls, decorated the Ishtar Gate, and strengthened the city's defences. But his authority is felt most strongly here in the halls where royal power is exercised each day. You pass beneath a wide gateway framed by carved brick reliefs. Inside lies a broad courtyard surrounded by tall administrative buildings. Officials move steadily through the open space carrying tablets, scrolls, and baskets of sealed documents. A group of soldiers stands near one entrance, their shields leaning against the wall as they watch the flow of activity with practiced calm. The ground beneath your feet is paved with large bricks arranged in careful patterns. The surfaces feel smooth from years of footsteps. Babylon's royal palace complex was immense. Archaeological excavations have revealed multiple interconnected courtyards, halls, storage rooms, and living quarters within the palace district. Historians studying these remains, including research examined by scholars affiliated with Yale and Oxford, believe that the southern palace alone may have contained more than 200 rooms organised around several major courtyards. This was not simply a residence, it was the administrative heart of an empire. You move along a shaded corridor where tall columns support a roof of wooden beams. The air here feels cooler, carrying the faint scent of cedarwood imported from distant mountain forests. Colourful glazed bricks decorate sections of the walls depicting geometric patterns and occasional animals similar to those you saw earlier along the processional way. A pair of scribes kneels beside a low table nearby. Their styluses move quickly across damp clay tablets as they record deliveries of grain arriving from the countryside. Each small, wedge-shaped mark pressed into the clay adds another piece of information to the city's vast administrative system. Babylon's bureaucracy is astonishingly organised. Thousands of clay tablets discovered in palace and temple archives reveal meticulous records of taxes, rations, labour assignments, land grants, and diplomatic correspondence. These documents allow modern historians to reconstruct the day-to-day functioning of the Babylonian state with surprising clarity. As you pass through another gateway, the palace architecture grows more elaborate. Large halls open on either side of the courtyard, their walls rising higher than those in the surrounding districts. Wooden doors reinforced with bronze hinges guard several inner chambers. The smell of oil lamps and polished wood lingers in the air. You can almost imagine the king himself walking these corridors. Nebuchadnezzar II ruled Babylon for more than 4 decades during the 6th century BCE. His reign marked the height of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, a period when the city dominated much of Mesopotamia and exerted influence across the Near East. Royal inscriptions discovered on building foundations reveal how proudly the king viewed his architectural achievements. In several texts, he describes restoring ancient temples, strengthening city walls, and decorating Babylon so magnificently that travellers from distant lands would marvel at its beauty. A curious historical detail preserved in one palace inscription records that Nebuchadnezzar ordered many of the palace walls to be decorated with glazed bricks bearing images of palm trees and stylized animals. The intention was not merely decoration. These images symbolized abundance, fertility, and royal protection over the land. Still, historians continue debating aspects of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. While Babylonian inscriptions portray him as a divinely favored builder and protector of the city, other sources from neighboring cultures remember him primarily as a conqueror who led military campaigns across the region. Scholars continue examining both perspectives to understand the full complexity of his rule. You step into one of the palace courtyards where sunlight pours down from above. At the centre stands a shallow pool of water reflecting the sky. Palm trees grow nearby, their leaves casting shifting shadows across the brick pavement. Servants move quietly through the space carrying baskets of fruit, pitchers of water, and bundles of textiles. The palace is not silent. It breathes with constant activity. Messengers arrive from distant provinces bearing reports. Administrators organise shipments of grain and livestock. Craftsmen repair tools and furniture used within the royal household. One slightly unusual discovery made by archaeologists involves a series of large storage rooms found within the palace complex. These chambers once held vast quantities of grain oil and other supplies reserved for royal use or for distribution during times of scarcity. The king's power rests not only on armies and monuments. It also depends on the careful management of resources that sustain the entire city. You pause briefly beside the courtyard pool. Beyond the palace walls, another legendary wonder of Babylon waits somewhere within the royal district, a place whispered about in ancient texts, gardens that seem to rise above the earth itself. From the quiet courtyard of the palace, you follow a shaded passageway that curves gently along the outer edge of the royal complex. The air grows cooler here, touched by a faint breeze that carries the scent of damp earth and growing plants. At first, the fragrance is subtle, then it becomes unmistakable. Fresh leaves, wet soil, blossoms warmed by sunlight. You step through a broad archway and pause in quiet amazement. Before you rises a series of terraces filled with greenery. Stone platforms climb upward in wide layers, each one supporting treed and shrubs and flowering plants. Long vines trail down from the edges of the upper terraces. Palm leaves sway gently in the wind. The sound of water trickling through hidden channels adds a soft, steady rhythm to the space. You are standing within what later generations would call the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The sight feels almost impossible in this dry landscape. Outside the palace walls, the land stretches across the Mesopotamian plain, where irrigation canals must carefully guide river water to the fields. Yet here inside the royal district, a lush garden rises above the ground like an artificial hillside. Your fingers brush against the rough bark of a small fig tree as you walk along a stone pathway. Birds flutter among the branches. The shade beneath the leaves offers welcome relief from the growing heat of the afternoon. Water flows quietly through narrow channels cut into the stone terraces, feeding the roots of the plants. Ancient writers describe this garden as one of the most astonishing creations of the ancient world. Later Greek historians recorded stories claiming that the gardens were built by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his wife, who longed for the green hills of her homeland in the mountains of Media. According to the story, the king ordered engineers to construct an elevated landscape where trees and flowers could grow high above the city. Whether this romantic tale is entirely true remains uncertain. Archaeologists studying Babylon's ruins have uncovered impressive palace foundations and complex water systems, but the exact location of the Hanging Gardens has never been conclusively identified within the city. Some historians believe the gardens may have existed, but left little surviving evidence due to centuries of erosion and rebuilding. Others have proposed an alternative theory. A group of scholars studying ancient Assyrian texts suggests that the famous gardens might actually have been located in the city of Nineveh rather than Babylon. According to this interpretation, later, Greek writers may have confused descriptions of different cities while recounting stories of Mesopotamian wonders. The debate continues among historians. Yet standing here among these terraces of greenery, it is easy to imagine how such a marvel could inspire legends that travelled across the ancient world. A curious technical detail recorded in ancient engineering descriptions hints at how water may have reached the upper terraces. Some texts refer to mechanical devices that lifted water from the Euphrates through a system of rotating screws or chain pumps operated by human or animal power. If such machines existed here, they would have required constant effort to keep the gardens alive under Babylon's intense sun. The sound of flowing water nearby suggests how vital that system must have been. You walk slowly along the garden path. Clusters of bright flowers bloom beside small pools. Pomegranate trees grow beside date palms. Fragrant herbs release their scent when brushed by the wind. Bees drift lazily from blossom to blossom. In one shaded corner, a stone bench sits beneath a tall cedar tree. You pause there for a moment. From this elevated terrace, the rooftops of Babylon stretch outward beyond the palace walls. The city's towers and temples rise above the streets like a sea of sunlit brick. The Euphrates glimmers in the distance, its slow waters reflecting the afternoon light. The garden feels like a quiet sanctuary within the powerful city. Servants move through the terraces carrying clay jars of water and baskets filled with cut branches. Their careful work keeps the plants trimmed and healthy. Without constant maintenance, the garden would quickly wither under the Mesopotamian sun. Babylon's rulers clearly valued this oasis. A small but intriguing note found in one Babylonian inscription suggests that exotic plants were occasionally imported from distant regions to decorate royal gardens. Seeds and saplings might travel hundreds of kilometers before reaching the palace grounds. These living displays served not only as places of beauty, but also as symbols of imperial reach. Every tree planted here reminded visitors that Babylon's influence stretched across lands where those plants originally grew. The afternoon light begins to soften. Shadows lengthen across the terraces as the sun slowly tilts westward. The trickling water sounds quieter now, blending with the rustle of leaves and distant city noises drifting up from below. You rise from the bench and continue along the garden path. Beyond the palace and its green terraces lies another quieter world within Babylon. A place not of kings or monuments but of knowledge. The scribes of the city are already waiting. Leaving the quiet terraces of the gardens behind you, step once more into the sunlit courtyards of Babylon's inner districts. The fragrance of blossoms slowly fades, replaced by the dry warmth of clay walls and the faint scent of parchment and wet earth. The path leads you toward a cluster of lower buildings arranged around several shaded courtyards. At first glance, these structures appear less impressive than the towering temples and palaces you've already seen. Their walls are plain mud brick, their doorways narrow. Wooden shutters hang loosely over small windows. Yet within these modest rooms lies something that quietly shapes the knowledge of the ancient world. You're entering the domain of Babylon's scribes. The sound reaches you before the sight. A soft, steady scratching fills the air. Styluses pressing into clay produce a faint rhythmic tapping like rain beginning to fall on the distant rooftops. Inside the first chamber, several men sit cross-legged on woven mats. Before each of them rests a small mound of damp clay. With careful movements, they press wedge-shaped marks into the surface using sharpened reed styluses. The writing is precise. Each tiny impression forms part of the complex script known as cuneiform, one of the earliest writing systems in human history. Thousands of symbols combine to represent words, sounds, numbers, and ideas. Babylon's scribes are highly trained specialists. Clay tablets discovered by archaeologists reveal that students spent many years mastering this writing system. Research examined by historians working with institutions such as Oxford and Yale indicates that scribal schools required apprentices to copy long lists of vocabulary, mathematical tables, and traditional literary texts before they could serve as official record keepers. Your hand brushes gently against a stack of freshly inscribed tablets drying near the doorway. Their surfaces feel slightly cool and damp. Once the writing is complete, many tablets will be left to dry in the sun. Others may be baked in kilns to preserve their contents permanently. This simple process has allowed thousands of Babylonian documents to survive for more than 2,000 years beneath the soil. You walk deeper into the building. Another chamber contains shelves lined with tablets arranged in neat rows. Some record shipments of grain or wool. Others list legal agreements, property transfers, or marriage contracts. Babylon's scribes document nearly every aspect of daily life. One remarkable discovery made by archaeologists involves a set of clay tablets containing advanced mathematical calculations. These tablets include multiplication tables, geometric problems, and methods for solving equations that reveal how sophisticated Babylonian mathematics had become. A fascinating study published in a major scientific journal suggested that Babylonian scholars may have used geometric reasoning to track planetary motion long before similar techniques appeared in later Greek astronomy. The quiet room suddenly feels like a laboratory of ancient science. A curious little scene unfolds beside a long table. A young apprentice carefully copies a tablet while his teacher watches closely. The student presses each wedge-shaped mark with slow concentration. When he makes a small mistake, the teacher gently smooths the clay with his thumb so the line can be written again. Learning here requires patience. Oddly enough, some tablets discovered by archaeologists appear to contain small doodles scratched into the margins by bored students. Simple drawings of animals or human faces occasionally appear beside otherwise serious exercises in writing and arithmetic. Even in the ancient world, students sometimes found ways to entertain themselves. You move into a larger hall where several scribes sit beneath an open skylight. Sunlight falls directly onto the clay tablets before them. Their styluses move quickly as they copy long columns of numbers. These are not ordinary accounting records. They're astronomical observations. Babylonian scholars are among the earliest systematic observers of the night sky. For generations, they have recorded the positions of planets' eclipses and lunar cycles with remarkable precision. Historians continued discussing exactly how advanced these observations became. Some researchers believe Babylonian astronomers developed mathematical methods capable of predicting planetary movements decades in advance. Others argue that their calculations relied more heavily on long-term pattern recognition, rather than fully abstract mathematical models. The debate continues as new tablets are studied, yet the achievements of Babylon's scholars remain undeniable. You pause beside one table where a scribe carefully presses numbers into a clay surface arranged in neat columns. His hands move with quiet confidence, guided by years of training. Outside the open skylight, the afternoon sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon. Soon the sky above Babylon will darken, and when it does, these scholars will climb to the rooftops and towers of the city to watch the stars. The heavens above Mesopotamia hold messages they believe the gods have written across the night. As the sun lowers toward the western edge of the sky, the air over Babylon begins to soften. The harsh brightness of midday fades into warmer tones of amber and gold. Long shadows stretch across rooftops and courtyards, and the noise of the markets gradually slows. The city prepares for evening. You follow a narrow stairway leading upward along the side of a scholarly building. The bricks beneath your hands are still warm from the day's heat, but the breeze moving across the rooftops carries a welcome coolness. At the top of the stairway, the city opens wide before you. Flat rooftops spread across Babylon in every direction, forming a landscape of terraces connected by ladders and stairways. From here, you can see families gathering in small groups to share their evening meals. Clay lamps flicker to life as the sun sinks lower. But your attention shifts upward. The first stars are beginning to appear. Several scholars already stand on a nearby platform. There are clay tablets prepared beside them. One man holds a small measuring instrument made of wooden cord. Another gazes steadily toward the horizon, where the final glow of daylight fades into deep blue. Babylon's astronomers are preparing for their nightly observations. For centuries, priests and scholars in Mesopotamia have studied the sky with remarkable dedication. They believe the movements of celestial bodies reveal patterns placed there by the gods. By carefully tracking these patterns, they hope to understand the hidden rhythms governing both the heavens and the earth. Clay tablets recovered from Babylonian archives confirm how meticulous these observations became. Research examined by historians working with institutions such as Yale and Oxford has revealed thousands of records documenting the positions of planets, the phases of the moon, and the timing of eclipses. Some of these records span generations passed from one group of scholars to the next. You step closer to the edge of the rooftop. The Euphrates below now reflects the fading twilight like a ribbon of dark silver. The city's walls glow softly under the last light of the sun. Beyond them, the flat plains of Mesopotamia stretch quietly into the gathering night. A scribe kneels beside a tablet and presses fresh clay into a smooth surface. He waits patiently. Soon the stars will guide his stylus. One fascinating discovery made by modern historians involves a group of tablets describing mathematical methods used by Babylonian astronomers to predict the movement of Jupiter across the sky. These calculations appear to use geometric reasoning that resembles techniques developed much later in medieval Europe. The idea that ancient scholars may have been using such sophisticated mathematics continues to surprise researchers studying the history of science. A curious cultural detail also emerges from the debates. Babylonian astronomers did not separate science from religion in the way modern societies often do. To them, observing the heavens was both an intellectual pursuit and a sacred duty. The planets were associated with powerful gods. Their movements were interpreted as signs revealing the intentions of the divine world. The appearance of an unusual eclipse or comet could therefore carry enormous significance. You notice one of the scholars raising his arm to point toward the eastern sky. A bright star has appeared. The group murmurs quietly as they begin marking the time and position on their tablets. The soft scratching of styluses resumes, echoing gently across the rooftop. Historians continue debating how Babylonian astronomical knowledge spread to other cultures. Some scholars believe Greek astronomers later adopted and expanded Babylonian observational data. Others argue that the influence may have travelled through several layers of cultural exchange across the ancient Near East. The exact pathways remain uncertain, yet there is little doubt that Babylon's long tradition of skywatching played a significant role in the early development of astronomy. The night deepens. More stars appear overhead, scattered across the darkening sky like grains of salt. The constellation patterns slowly emerge, familiar shapes passed down through generations of observers. A faint breeze moves across the rooftop, carrying the scent of cooling brick and distant cooking fires. Below you, Babylon grows quieter. Lamps glow in windows. Conversations soften into evening murmurs. The day's business has ended and the great city settles into the slower rhythm of night. But here on the rooftops, the scholars remain fully awake. They watch the heavens with patient focus, recording each movement with careful precision. For them, the sky is a vast manuscript written by the gods themselves, and every star that rises above Babylon adds another line to the story. Morning arrives quietly after the long watch of the stars. The eastern sky begins to glow with pale silver light, and the rooftops of Babylon slowly warm beneath the returning sun. The scholars who spent the night recording celestial movements carefully seal their tablets, pressing small cylinder seals across the clay before placing them into baskets for storage. The observations will soon join thousands of other records preserved within the city's archives. You descend the narrow stairways back into the waking streets. Already the city is stirring again. Bakers light to their ovens. Farmers approach the gates with baskets of produce. The familiar sounds of carts and conversation ripple through the morning air. Yet as you walk deeper into the administrative quarter, you notice another aspect of Babylon beginning its daily work: the machinery of law and order. Babylon is not simply a city of temples and markets. It is also a carefully managed system of governance that keeps tens of thousands of regions functioning within a shared structure of rules. Inside a shaded courtyard, several officials sit behind a long wooden table. Before them lie rows of clay tablets waiting to receive new records. Citizens approach one by one, carrying disputes agreements or requests that must be formally recorded. A farmer presents a complaint about a damaged irrigation channel shared with a neighbouring field. Two merchants arrive together to register the terms of a trade agreement. A young couple kneels beside a scribe who carefully inscribes the conditions of their marriage contract. Each case is written into clay. Babylon's legal culture is deeply rooted in written law. One of the most famous earlier examples of Mesopotamian law comes from the Code of Hammurabi, a collection of regulations carved into stone centuries before the time you're walking through now. Although Hammurabi lived long before Nebuchadnezzar's reign, his legal tradition influenced the systems that continue to operate in Babylon for generations. Historians studying surviving legal tablets, including research examined by scholars associated with institutions such as Stanford and Oxford, have discovered that Babylonian courts handled a remarkable variety of cases. These range from property disputes and debt agreements to inheritance questions and labour contracts. The courts functioned with a surprising level of administrative precision. You move closer to observe the proceedings. The scribe listens carefully as two men argue over the ownership of a small orchard outside the city. After hearing both sides, an official consults a previous tablet stored in a nearby basket. The earlier record confirms the boundaries of the land described in the dispute. The decision becomes clear. The scribe presses the ruling into fresh clay while witnesses stand nearby to confirm the judgment. Once the tablet is sealed, the agreement becomes part of Babylon's permanent legal archive. A curious detail found in some Babylonian court tablets reveals that witnesses often press their personal cylinder seals into the clay to authenticate legal decisions. Each seal carried a unique carved design, representing its owner functioning somewhat like a personal signature. Some of these seals are incredibly detailed. Tiny scenes carved into their surfaces show gods' animals and mythological creatures arranged in elaborate patterns. When rolled across wet clay, the seal leaves a continuous image that identifies the individual who approved the document. You watch as one merchant carefully rolls his seal across a tablet's surface. The impression appears instantly, a small but important symbol of authority. Scholars continue discussing how formal Babylonian legal institutions truly were. Some historians argue that many disputes were likely resolved informally within families or neighborhoods before reaching official courts. Others suggest that the written records represent only a fraction of the legal activity that occurred across the city. The surviving tablets give us remarkable glimpses, but not the complete picture. Still, the system clearly plays a vital role in maintaining order within such a large urban population. Beyond the courthouse courtyard, other administrative offices handle the daily logistics of governing Babylon. Officials track shipments of grain arriving from provincial fields. Tax collectors record contributions from merchants and landowners. Labor supervisors organize teams responsible for maintaining canals, roads, and city walls. The empire's stability depends on these quiet processes. A slightly amusing detail appears in several administrative tablets involving rations issued to workers. Lists of food distributions carefully measure portions of barley oil and beer provided to laborers performing state projects. Even minor adjustments in these rations were carefully recorded, showing how closely Babylon's administrators monitored resources. Nothing escapes the scribe's attention. As the morning grows brighter, you step back into the open street. The city hums once more with life farmers, unloading vegetables, craftsmen opening their workshops, children chasing one another along narrow alleys. Babylon's order does not come from walls alone. It flows through these countless written agreements, rulings and records that quietly organize the life of the empire. And yet beyond these systems of control, Babylon remains a place where people from distant lands constantly arrive. Its streets are never truly still. As the morning continues to unfold, the streets of Babylon begin to fill with a familiar mixture of languages, clothing styles, and unfamiliar faces. You notice it first in the markets. The traders arriving through the gates today do not all look alike. Some wear long wool robes wrapped tightly against desert winds. Others dress in lighter garments suited for distant coastal climates. Their accents rise and fall in different rhythms as they speak to merchants and scribes. Babylon is not merely a capital city, it is a crossroads. The empire that radiates from these walls stretches across wide regions of the ancient Near East. Roads and river routes connect Babylon to lands hundreds of kilometers away. Every day, caravans bring goods travelers, officials, and sometimes captives into the city. You follow a narrow street toward one of the outer commercial districts where caravans often unload their goods. The smell of animals greets you first. Camels kneel patiently beside bundles wrapped in leather and woven cloth. Donkeys stamp their hooves against the dusty ground while handlers loosen the ropes securing their cargo. The sounds of shifting packs and creaking harnesses mix with the murmur of negotiation between merchants. The marketplace becomes a meeting ground of cultures. A trader from the western deserts opens a bundle containing dyed wool and embroidered textiles. Nearby, a merchant from the mountains displays pieces of polished stone carved into small ornaments. A group of sailors from the Persian Gulf unload clay jars filled with dates and salt. Babylon's prosperity grows from this constant exchange. Clay tablets preserved in Babylonian archives confirm that the city played a central role in long-distance trade networks linking Mesopotamia with regions such as Anatolia, the Levant, and the Persian Gulf. Historians examining these tablets, including work studied by scholars connected to Stanford and Oxford, have found detailed records describing caravan routes, customs duties, and official inspections of imported goods. You pause beside a scribe seated under a woven canopy. Before him rests a fresh tablet ready to record the arrival of goods brought by a group of merchants from distant lands. One trader carefully lists the contents of his shipment while the scribe presses each detail into the clay. Every transaction becomes part of the city's growing archive. A slightly unusual observation recorded by historians involves the variety of languages spoken within Babylon. While Akkadian served as the primary written language of administration, many people in the city likely spoke other dialects or languages depending on their place of origin. Aramaic, for example, gradually became widely used across the Near East as a common language of communication. The city's streets therefore echoed with many voices. As you continue walking, you pass a small group of travellers gathered around a storyteller seated on a low stool. His hands move animatedly as he recounts tales of distant lands and heroic adventures. The listeners lean forward with curiosity, while children sit cross-legged near the front. Stories travel through Babylon just as goods do. One curious historical footnote reveals that among the foreigners living in Babylon were communities of people brought to the city during earlier military campaigns. Some had been relocated from conquered territories as part of imperial policies designed to integrate distant populations into the empire's economic system. Over time, many of these groups established neighborhoods within the city where their traditions blended with Babylonian customs. Historians continue debating how these diverse communities experienced life inside the empire's capital. Some scholars argue that Babylon functioned as a relatively cosmopolitan center, where different cultures coexisted through trade and administration. Others suggest that tensions may have existed between local populations and newly arrived groups. The surviving evidence provides glimpses but not complete certainty. Still, the diversity of the city feels unmistakable as you move through its streets. You notice a group of artisans shaping jewellery from thin strips of silver. Their designs incorporate patterns that seem slightly different from traditional Babylonian motifs, perhaps reflecting artistic influences carried from distant regions. Nearby, a baker sells flat loaves sprinkled with seeds, while speaking with a traveller whose clothing suggests he has journeyed across long desert routes. Babylon absorbs these influences constantly. The city grows richer, not only through its architecture and political power, but also through the blending of cultures that arrive within its walls. The afternoon sun begins to lower slightly in the sky. Longer shadows stretch along the streets as the busiest hours of the day slowly pass. Caravans that arrived in the morning now prepare for rest. Animals are watered and fed. Merchants count their earnings while scribes seal the final tablets of the day's transactions. You pause near one of the city's outer gates and glance back toward the heart of Babylon. From here, the skyline reveals its familiar shapes, the towering ziggurat rising above the temples, the palace walls stretching across the royal district, and the distant blue shimmer of the Ishtar Gate. For centuries, this city has drawn the world toward it. Yet even the greatest cities eventually face the shifting winds of history. Beyond the distant horizon, new powers are already rising. As the afternoon fades toward evening, a subtle tension seems to settle over the city. You do not see it immediately in the streets. The markets still hum with activity. Children still chase one another through dusty alleys. Merchants continue weighing goods on bronze scales while scribes press their final marks into clay tablets. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythms of Babylon, something deeper is changing. You hear fragments of conversation as you walk. Two traders pause beside a stall of copper tools, speaking quietly about news arriving from distant provinces. A messenger passes quickly through the street, his sandals striking the ground in urgent rhythm. A group of soldiers stands in discussion near a gateway, their voices low but serious. Rumors travel quickly through great cities. The empire surrounding Babylon has stood strong for decades under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar II and his successors. Its armies once marched confidently across neighbouring lands, asserting dominance over rival kingdoms. The city's towering walls and immense wealth seem to promise enduring security, but history rarely remains still. Beyond Babylon's fertile plains, the political landscape of the ancient Near East continues to shift. A new power is rising in the east. The Persian Empire, led by the ambitious ruler Cyrus, has begun expanding rapidly across vast territories. One region after another falls under his authority as alliances shift and older empires weaken. Clay tablets discovered in Babylonian archives provide subtle clues that the city's leaders were aware of these growing pressures. Some administrative records show increased attention to military supplies and defensive preparations during the later years of the Neo-Babylonian period. Historians studying these documents, including research examined by scholars associated with Yale and Oxford, suggest that Babylon's rulers understood the strategic danger posed by Persia's expansion. Yet the city still appears outwardly confident. You walk once more along the processional way as the sky begins turning shades of amber and violet. The rows of sculpted lions cast long shadows across the pavement. Their silent forms seem almost watchful in the fading light. The walls that once symbolized Babylon's invincibility now stand quietly against the approaching night. A curious anecdote preserved by later historical writers describes how some residents of Babylon believed their city could never truly fall because of its massive fortifications and the protection of the god Marduk. The Euphrates flowed through the city itself, providing water even during sieges. Vast food supplies stored in royal warehouses could sustain the population for years. Confidence in the city's defences ran deep. Still, historians continue to debating exactly how Babylon eventually came under Persian control. Some ancient accounts claim that Cyrus's forces diverted the Euphrates River and entered the city through the riverbed, while Babylonian soldiers celebrated a festival. Other scholars argue that the transition may have occurred with less dramatic conflict, perhaps through political negotiations or limited resistance. The surviving sources offer different versions of the event. As you stand beside the towering walls, the uncertainty of history feels strangely present. The city around you continues its evening routines. Lamps begin appearing in windows. Families gather in courtyards to share meals beneath the cooling sky. Musicians play soft melodies in distant houses, while the smell of cooking grain drifts across the streets. Babylon remains vibrant, yet somewhere beyond the horizon armies move. You walk toward one of the outer gates where the evening breeze flows more freely across the plains. The last glow of sunlight touches the distant fields where farmers finish their work for the day. From this vantage point, the world beyond Babylon appears calm and peaceful, but history is already preparing its next chapter. The great city that once dominated the ancient Near East will soon pass into the hands of a new empire. Its temples will still stand, its markets will still bustle, but its rulers and political destiny will change. Scholars continue discussing how Babylon's citizens experienced this transformation. Some evidence suggests that the Persian conquest may have been relatively orderly, allowing the city's institutions and religious traditions to continue operating under new leadership. If so, Babylon's story did not end with its fall. Instead, the city adapted once again to the changing tides of power. The sky above you darkens as the first stars appear. Their quiet light reflects softly against the walls and rooftops of Babylon. The city that once believed itself eternal now prepares to enter a new era of history. Night settles gently across the city. The last colours of sunset fade beyond the distant plains and a quiet blue darkness spreads slowly over Babylon. Lamps glow softly in courtyards and windows. The noise of carts and merchants has faded, replaced by quieter sounds, distant conversation. The rustle of palm leaves, the steady flow of the Euphrates moving through the sleeping city. You walk once more along the familiar streets. The great monuments of Babylon now appear softer under the moonlight. The towering ziggurat stands like a dark mountain against the sky. The Ishtar Gate reflects faint glimmers of starlight across its glazed blue bricks. Even the long rows of lion reliefs along the processional way seem calmer, now their silent forms resting in the cool night air. Babylon has endured many generations already. Long before the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, the second earlier rulers built temples along these same riverbanks. After his time, new empires would rise and claim the city as part of their domains. The Persians would govern here. Later, Alexander the Great would pass through Babylon, imagining plans to make it the centre of his vast empire. Records preserved in ancient texts and archaeological studies show how the city remained important for centuries after its political power began to fade. Researchers examining the ruins, including scholars associated with universities such as Oxford and Yale, have uncovered layers of rebuilding that reveal how successive cultures continue to use and reshape Babylon. The city never vanished all at once. Instead, it slowly transformed. You pause beside the riverbank where the Euphrates flows quietly beneath the stars. The water reflects the moon in gentle ripples. Somewhere along the shore, a small boat rocks softly against its mooring rope. Babylon once stood as the beating heart of the ancient world. Its walls impressed travellers. Its temples connected heaven and earth. Its scholars recorded the movements of the planets and the patterns of law that shape daily life. Its markets drew merchants from distant lands. Yet time as always moves forward. One curious detail discovered by archaeologists reminds us how completely the city eventually faded from view. For centuries after Babylon declined, much of its once magnificent architecture collapsed into low mounds of earth. Travellers crossing the plain sometimes walked past these ruins, without realizing they were standing atop one of the greatest cities ever built. The memory of Babylon survived mostly through stories. Scholars still discuss how these stories shaped later traditions. Some ancient texts describe Babylon as a symbol of human ambition and power. Others remember it as a place of extraordinary knowledge and architectural brilliance. The debates continue as historians and archaeologists study new evidence uncovered from the ancient soil. You look back once more toward the towering silhouette of the ziggurat. Even in darkness, its shape dominates the skyline. It is easy to imagine the generations of people who stood in this same place before you, priests climbing the terraces to greet the dawn merchants entering the city through the Ishtar Gate, scholars watching the stars from rooftop observatories. Their footsteps once filled these streets. Their voices once echoed between these walls. The night grows deeper. A soft breeze moves across the river, carrying the cool scent of water and distant fields. The great city around you settles into sleep beneath the wide Mesopotamian sky, and as the stars drift slowly across the heavens, Babylon rests quietly in the long memory of human history. The world will continue to change. Empires will rise and fall, new cities will grow where deserts once stood. But somewhere beneath the shifting sands of time, the foundations of Babylon remain. A reminder of what human hands once built beside the rivers of Mesopotamia. The wind softens, the river continues its patient flow, and the ancient city fades gently into the quiet of the night. Now the story slows. You take one final walk through the sleeping city, letting the pace of your thoughts match the calm rhythm of the Euphrates. The great monuments of Babylon no longer feel overwhelming. Under the quiet sky, they seem almost peaceful, like old guardians watching over centuries of memory. The ziggurat rises silently in the distance, its terraces dim in the moonlight. Earlier today it felt enormous and commanding a bridge between earth and heaven. Now it stands more like a shadow of history, reminding you how many generations climbed those same steps with prayers and questions about the world above. The breeze carries soft scents through the night air. Faint traces of incense still linger from the temples. Somewhere nearby, the gentle smell of baked grain drifts from a courtyard oven slowly cooling after the evening meal. Babylon breathes quietly. You pass the processional way once more. The lion reliefs along the walls appear almost alive in the silver glow of the moon. Earlier they seemed proud and powerful. Now they simply keep watch over empty streets, their stone forms patient and calm. Even the great Ishtar Gate feels different at night. The deep blue bricks no longer shine with brilliant sunlight, yet the faint starlight resting on their surface gives them a quiet beauty. It's easy standing here to imagine the many people who once lived their lives within these walls. Merchants counting their earnings after a busy day. Priests whispering prayers beside glowing lamps. Scholars pressing the final marks into clay tablets before the night sky filled with stars. Their voices have faded with time, yet their city remains part of the long story of humanity. Slowly you turn toward the river one last time. The Euphrates flows just as it did thousands of years ago, steady and patient beneath the stars. The wind cools, the sounds of the city grow softer, and with that gentle quiet, Babylon fades into the distance. Sweet dreams.